All right. In fact, what is important right now at this hour is we are going to look at the issue of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which is back in the debate after the civilian killings in Nagaland. This is one such act which was passed way back in 1958. It's applicable to certain parts of the insurgency affected areas in the Northeast. Now, remember, this is an act that is in force in most of the states of the Northeast, in Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, and also in certain parts of Arunachal Pradesh as well. But the debate has got reignited because there was an incident in Mon district of Nagaland, the army operation that resulted in the tragic death of 14 civilians. In fact, now the Union Home Ministry has decided to set up an SIT probe. The report is expected within a month. Also, at the same time, the army has initiated a court of inquiry, which is to be headed by a Major General rank officer. Now, at the moment, we are going to talk about this entire issue. We are trying to go across to Member of Parliament from Assam, Gaurav Gogoi, who will be joining us shortly on this. So let me first welcome Gaurav Gogoi, who is with us right now on the program. Very good evening, Gaurav. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to begin by asking you that, you are a prominent Member of Parliament with roots in the Northeast. How do you perceive the recent happenings? What happened in Nagaland on the 4th and 5th of December, where 14 civilians were killed in a counter-insurgency operation? How are you perceiving this entire incident that has really now brought many other issues back out in the front, especially the AFSPA? But first, tell me, how are you perceiving the recent happenings?
Well, it is a very painful episode because those who are familiar with the Northeast understand that people of Northeast often feel alienated and feel a sense of disconnect with the current and past governments in Delhi. And when these kind of episodes take place, when ordinary civilians are mistaken for hardcore insurgents and then just shot down, this kind of episodes just deepens that pain and deepens that separation.
Yes.
And it comes also on the back of on other episodes in the Northeast, in Manipur, where the army colonel has been under attack. In Meghalaya, in Shillong, we've seen, there was a disturbance when a former insurgent was killed. Similarly, Assam and Mizoram police have clashed. So for the past 1 year, the Northeast has just seen one episode after another of conflict. And it just creates a disturbance in everyone's mind, including, those who want to believe that Northeast is peaceful and stable and has recovered from its insurgent-prone past.
Right, but at the same time, what the Home Minister had said in Parliament, Gaurav. What he said was this was a case of mistaken identity. Regrets were expressed by the army. Also, like I mentioned, a court of inquiry has been initiated. The intent was never to kill. That is what is being said. Also, the individuals tried to flee and therefore they had to be shot down. In the second incident, the army says it was a case of self-defense when the protesters came out to target the armed forces.
Well, Frida, I have a lot of faith in the Indian Armed Forces. I believe they're doing a very important job protecting us from external threats. But it saddens me when our own armed forces are being duped by wrong intelligence. And it saddens me further that at the cost, who has to bear the cost? Not the people who fired the shots, but the families who are left without their sons and fathers. Now, what a heavy cost those 17 families have paid for this mistaken intelligence input. And one thing led to the other, and one incident led to another. But it all started on the basis of that army relied on false intelligence to conduct a very heavy military operation. And I believe it will only behove the army if they also hold themselves to very strict standards of operation, and if they also show and display accountability within their system, I think it will only bridge the gap now that has come up in Nagaland between the army and the people of that state.
So what are you suggesting in that sense? Are you suggesting that AFSPA should now, be repealed, or at least it should be made more humane? Because this is something that is in force, and the army is well within its rights to actually exercise their powers under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But with an incident like this, how do you think going forward we can avert such instances?
Well, this is exactly the case where this is a decision that the armed forces have to make. Do they invoke the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, or do they find in their own investigation that there has been gross negligence, there has been criminal negligence, which has led to this, and therefore they choose not to invoke the AFSPA? That is the decision of the armed forces, and I only feel that in today's military operations, human intelligence and support of the local community is so important, even for the military operations in Nagaland. I feel the army can choose not to invoke AFSPA in this case. Also, my broader comment on AFSPA is that the the Northeast is a very different Northeast from what it was in the 90s, in the heydays of insurgencies. Right now, most of Northeast is under relative calm and is relatively peaceful. There are only certain pockets, certain districts. So I don't feel that right now you need AFSPA to be invoked across the entire state of all the states of Northeast. As I said, the Northeast has been relatively peaceful for the past decade, and most of the major insurgent groups have surrendered. There are only one or two whose operations are within a very defined geography. Surely the army in the 21st century, I believe, do not need a colonial law to conduct the operations.
We are putting out that data on our screens as well, where you're referring to the decline in insurgency incidents. And I'm just kind of highlighting that for our viewers, what Gaurav Gogoi is referring to. Insurgency incidents, for instance, in 2014 was 824 in the Northeast, has come down to 162 in the year 2020. Civilian killings, however, has gone up to 907. The civilian killings is a matter of huge concern. Security personnel killed in 1999 was 208. At the moment, the security personnel killed also, the figures have come down. Now, overall, what we are given to understand is 8 security personnel killed this year till November 2021, and 187 incidents of insurgency reported. But the point you were making, Gaurav, I want to draw your attention back to the issue that you were raising about how insurgency has declined and there is no place for a draconian law, a colonial law. That is an argument being made by a lot of people. Your father and the former Chief Minister of Assam, Arunachal Gogoi, ruled the state for 3 terms. He is often credited for controlling insurgency. What do you think worked in favor of Assam in particular, state that you and me come from?
Well, in Assam, there was a very strict law enforcement approach combined with the development approach, because you wanted to wean away the local communities who were supporting certain insurgent groups there. And there was also a process of political dialogue. There was this leadership which looked at Assam in a very progressive and a visionary manner. And therefore, when it comes to curbing counterinsurgency, you cannot adopt only a guns and bullets approach. You need to focus on development. You need to understand the aspirations of the local community. And you need to connect with the local youth, because these insurgent groups will not thrive if there are no local youth filling its ranks. It will automatically die down.
Okay.
And that is why, you need a multi-pronged approach. And, if in this, coming back to the Nagaland case, you don't want, young people to be frustrated against the Indian armed forces or stop, supporting them, whether logistically or in terms of community intelligence. Therefore, I feel the Indian armed forces have a very important choice to make. Do they try to mend the bridge with the people of Nagaland? There's a big festival which is going on, which is their showcase festival, the Hornbill Festival, and had to be called off. It's so unfortunate. This is also the month of Christmas. It's a month of joy and celebration. And again, it's going to be a very sad Christmas and a very dark Christmas for many. So I feel, given the sensitivity of the Northeast in mind, given there's so much at stake, the political dialogues with the various insurgent groups is also at stake. I think both the government and the Indian Armed Forces need to be extremely cautious and sensitive.
Right. At the same time, now, of course, Gaurav, what we also want to understand from you is that what is the position that the opposition is taking? Is it time for the BJP NDA government at the center to drop this hardline approach on AFSPA in particular? Because this is echoing across the country now, the incident that happened in Nagaland. What would be your suggestion to the center on this in particular?
Well, my suggestion first and foremost is that the life of a civilian in Nagaland or in the Northeast is no different from the life of a person sitting in Delhi. And if there was a bus carrying ordinary passengers and they were shot down by a military unit based on wrong intelligence,
yes,
we would hold that military unit to a very high standards of accountability. Surely the people of Nagaland deserve the same level of strict response and strict measures of accountability. Show that Nagaland is an intrinsic part of India, the Northeast is an intrinsic part of India, and an Indian citizen's life, no matter where he resides, is equally important. So I think that's very important. That message should go out. The center should announce its compensation, and the armed forces in the local areas have to do a lot in terms of bridging the community. And just on this other note that you talked about, the BJP and its allies being in power, many
yes,
of its allies seem to be echoing a very different stance on
yes,
AFSPA, on Citizenship Amendment Act in the past, whether it's the government in Mizoram or the government in Nagaland and in Meghalaya as well. So clearly, there are certain fissures and certain cracks in the Northeast Democratic Alliance, of which the BJP and these parties are a part of. And they need to have a very important conversation. I think it's very important that the BJP understands that even their allies are not on board with them on this issue.
Yes, that is what I was going to ask you, along with the other issue of how the NEDA chief, your former Congressman Himanta Biswa Sharma, has been summoned by the center. The chief ministers of at least 2 states now are raising the issue with the center. And like you mentioned, they are allied with the BJP in the governments, in the respective governments in Meghalaya and Nagaland. They have also raised the issue of repeal of AFSPA. You are saying that there are fissures within those alliances. Agatha Sangma has raised the issue calling for an adjournment motion. So is there enough pressure now, Gaurav, to repeal AFSPA, or is it still a long road ahead? What is the Congress's plan of action on this now with the parliament in session?
See, both the Congress party and I would say these regional parties who have been in the region understand the sentiments of the people of Northeast. And we've both been saying the same message to the government of India, to the BJP government in Delhi, that you need to be much more democratic and much more inclusive in your approach. This top-down, Delhi-centric Northeast people from the Northeast will have to abide by whatever Delhi or Nagpur decides. That kind of approach does not suffice. Even their own allies, as I said, are opposing them on many of these issues. So it's very necessary on all matters that the BJP government in Delhi adopts a much more inclusive and open approach towards all parts of India, whether it's the South, the West, North, or the Northeast.
Right. On one last question, Gaurav, on the issue of the Naga Peace Accord, and we all remember those pictures of the Prime Minister celebrating, so to speak, the Naga Peace Accord with much fanfare in the Prime Minister's residence, talking about how it has taken a final shape. Do you think, or do you believe that, do you have reason to believe that the recent happenings in Nagaland will anyway impact that kind of peace accord? Because most Naga insurgent groups are already under ceasefire. Yet, something like this can change things. Do you have reason to believe that that can happen?
First of all, Afrida, we must understand there is no Naga peace accord, because if there was an accord which was signed, it would be in public domain and you and I would be debating its clauses. Neither you have seen it, nor I have seen it, nor the people of Nagaland have seen it. So I don't know what was signed, but I do know that negotiations are on. I do know that Government of India had an interlocutor back in 2014 who was sent to the state of Nagaland as a governor. That person no longer occupies the position of governor of Nagaland, was sent out of that state. So clearly the talks on the Naga political issue have not reached their logical conclusion. And surely this kind of incidents would only delay the logical conclusion of these talks, would only act as an obstacle. And therefore, I said in my speech on the floor of the House that I appeal for peace from all sections of society.
Right, appeal for peace, and of course that is something we all want, and it always is a matter of important discussion on whether these kind of acts, which like you said have been there since the colonial era, 63 years is a long time to evaluate whether a particular act has done more harm than good, whether it has really been effective, whether it has worked towards people's interests and towards the interest of peace, as you put it. Thank you so much, Gaurav Gogoi, for joining us here on Mirror Now this evening. Appreciate your giving us time for this discussion.